beautiful people of the Python community. Welcome to PyLady Conference 2023. I'm Ivy, your MC for this session. Just now we have heard of a panel talking about gender challenge in the workplace for ladies, and I believe that is more than that in just the gender issue. Now, in these sessions, for the keynote sessions in the APAC region, we do have Marlene, Mhangami for these sessions. She's going to talk to us about a topic about representations. But let me introduce her first. Marlene is a Zimbabwean software engineer, explorer, and speaker based in the city of Harare. She is previously director and vice chair for the Python Software Foundations and currently serving as the vice chair of the Associations for Computing Machinery Practitioner Board. In 2017, she co-founded ZimboPy, a non-for-profit organization that gives Zimbabwean young women access to the resources in the field of technology. She is also the previous chair of PyCon Africa and is an advocate for women in tech on the continent. Professionally, Marlene is currently working as a developer advocate at Voltran Data. Now, a bit more. In this power of representations and its ability to help us move beyond our representations in these circumstances. She'll also share with us her own experiences as a Zimbabwean women working in tech and how representations and in many cases the lack of therefore has affected her and others. Over to you, Marlene.
Perfect. Thank you, Ivy. Appreciate it. Hopefully my slides will show up on the screen. Great. Okay, so the title of my talk that I'm going to be giving to you today is Transcendence. So it's a really interesting word. It's a very strange word. And as I speak and give the rest of my talk, hopefully it'll become clear what that word means. There was actually a Johnny Depp movie about Transcendence a couple of years ago. It wasn't a great movie, so we're not going to go off of that. But before I get started, I will tell you a little bit more in detail. Ivy did a great job of introducing me, but a bit more about my background is that I currently am calling you from Harare, Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe is a country in the southern part of Africa. It's just above South Africa. And I've lived there for most of my life, really enjoy it. So if you're ever looking to come to Africa at some point, message me and I'd be happy to give you a tour of Zimbabwe. Another thing about me is that I work as a developer advocate. So what that means is that half of the work that I do is software engineering, and I really work mainly on Python open source libraries. And then the other half of the work that I do is really sort of communications work, whether that's writing or speaking. And I've really enjoyed being a developer advocate. And then a third thing about me is that I am the current vice chair of the ACM, which is the Association for Computing Machinery, and that is one of the largest and oldest computing societies in the world. It used to be very research focused, but now it's moving more towards practitioners and helping people who are actually software engineers in practice. And then a final thing is that, like Ivy said, I was on the board of directors for the Python Software Foundation, and that's the nonprofit organization behind the Python programming language. And they actually, I think, are sponsoring this conference. I hope so. And they do great work as well. So let's go ahead and get started. So to try and help us understand what this idea of transcendence means, I'm going to try and play a video clip for us. It might not have sound, unfortunately. We'll see if it actually plays with sound. But let's go ahead and try and play that video clip. Let's see. Okay, I'm not sure if you could hear the sound or not, But this clip was a clip of a very sort of excited group of people. This was actually a clip from the UK, and this is a scene where people are watching soccer. And, this is a really popular scene. It doesn't just happen in the UK, but this is something that I've seen happening all over the world, here in Zimbabwe and other places of the world that I've been to, where people really get into the sports that they're watching. So I'm not a big fan of soccer. So whenever I see these sorts of things happening, I always think of the question, what exactly is going on here? Like, why are these people so emotional? Why are they screaming? And what exactly is going on in this video clip? And this is actually something that's been studied by a number of different people. And a few years ago, a New York Times article came out, and it was published with the title, Sports Psychology, It Isn't Just a Game. And researchers from this article found that many fans, when they were watching, sports games, they became so tied to the teams that they were watching that they experienced the same hormonal surges and other psychological changes watching the games just as much as the athletes playing in the games did. So this is a quote on the screen from that article, and it's by a guy called Professor Robert Cialdini. And the quote says, "Our sports heroes are our warriors. This is not some light diversion to be enjoyed for its inherent grace and harmony. The self is centrally involved in the outcome of the game. Whoever you root for represents you." Another quote from this article was from a researcher called James Dabbs. And in this, he says that the results suggest that fans empathize with the competitors to such an extent, to such a degree, that they mentally project themselves into the game and experience hormonal surges that the athletes do, the same hormonal surges the athletes do. So I think this idea is so fascinating. Here we have this sort of human experience where just by watching someone who inspires us, we can literally transcend. So that's that word, transcendence. We can actually transcend our bodies and mentally project ourselves to the extent that we start to have the same hormonal changes as the person that we're watching. And I think this is just really incredible. And when I was reflecting on this experience myself, like, when have I ever watched some sport or something that made me feel this way, where I was feeling almost the same hormones as the person I was watching? And the person that actually came to mind was this woman on the screen. And that's Serena Williams. Hopefully some of you know who Serena is. And she is a famous, if you don't know who Serena Williams is, she's a famous tennis player, one of my favorites, and she's had a phenomenal career. She's actually recently retired, which was honestly devastating news for me personally. But Serena had an amazing career. And for me, when I was growing up, I remember my dad was very into tennis. And I can clearly remember this one time when all of us as a family were sitting around the television on a Sunday, and Serena had made it to the finals at Wimbledon. And I remember watching every single stroke that she played and being so nervous for her, because I really wanted her to win. And I had never been to Wimbledon before in my life. But I felt like I was there with her in that moment. And I remember thinking to myself, I was just like, if Serena could win this game, then everything will be right with the world. And I just had all of this adrenaline running through me. So, Serena actually ended up winning this game, and it was really exciting for me. And I basically was just like, okay, I am the next Serena Williams. We basically look exactly the same. Here I am, pretty much Serena. And so I decided after watching that game that I would become the next great tennis player. I would become Serena Williams. And I started practicing tennis every single day. And I actually ended up joining the school tennis team and ended up being captain of that team. And unfortunately, I didn't make it to Wimbledon, mainly because of my parents. They didn't invest enough money into my talent. So that was their fault. But I really was changed by this experience. So absolutely one of the main reasons that I became involved and became so excited about the game of tennis is because of this experience watching Serena Williams play and seeing myself represented by her. So there are a few things that I think this idea of transcendence that we see in sport can help teach us about the idea of transcendence and also about cultivating community, and why it matters not only just in sports for you to see someone who represents you or to be inspired by someone who represents you, but here in tech, how that translates and how that matters. So the first thing that I think this idea of transcendence teaches us is the idea of inclusion. It teaches us something about inclusion. And this is a quote on the screen by a lady called Marianne Wright-Eldman. And she says, "You cannot become what you cannot see." And it might be possible, I've given this talk before, and at some point someone came up to me and was like, well, actually, you might be able to become something that you haven't seen. And it might be possible, but it's really, really hard and very unlikely for someone to maybe out of the blue just think to themselves, I'm going to become a tennis player, if they've never seen someone play tennis. And even if they have seen someone playing tennis, it's very hard for them to imagine themselves doing that if the person that they're watching doesn't look like them at all. And one example that I think about is the sport of ice hockey. So I'm not sure if any of you watching have ever heard of ice hockey, but it's like a game. It's like actual hockey where people play it on ice. And that is wild to me. And I didn't actually realize that this was a popular sport until I met like a group of Canadians, and they were really, really excited about this, about ice hockey. And I didn't know about it because I live in Zimbabwe. It doesn't snow in Zimbabwe. We don't have an ice hockey rink. And growing up, I'd never seen someone play ice hockey. And so in general, I just didn't have this lifelong dream that I'm going to grow up one day and become an ice hockey player. And even right now, if I go and watch ice hockey games like I did later on, the people that are playing that game don't look like me. And so I'm not inspired to think to myself, okay, I could become an ice hockey player. So when we think of this idea of inclusion, one of the major things that is so important is that we need people who represent different interests, different demographics, whether that's different ethnicities or different spheres of expertise, which I'm going to talk about later. I think it's important that those people are in visible positions of leadership so that we can have sort of representation at all levels. And I think this idea of representation is not just for making it look like you have people from different places around the world. I think that those people are actually able to, when you have someone from the APAC region or from the region of Africa, those people in those positions are able to advocate for their communities in a better way because they know the specific challenges that their communities face. So a practical example, I think that's really interesting of this, is the Python Software Foundation itself. And like I mentioned before, I was on the board of the PSF a few years ago, and I was on the board for 5 years, but I was the first African person to ever be on the board. And it's really interesting because the mission of the PSF, like you see on the screen, is to promote, protect, and advance the Python programming language and to support and facilitate the growth of a diverse and international community of Python programmers. So I think it's important to keep in mind that that Python itself as a language is being used on every single continent in the world. So even in Antarctica, there is a group of people that are meeting up to code in Python. And wherever you go in the world, on any continent, there will be people who are coding in Python. So it's really important that the mission of the PSF is aligned to be able to serve this global community. And like I mentioned, I was on the board, which helps to steer the foundation and helps to make decisions about the foundation and how people are sort of introduced to Python. And when I was on that board, it wasn't necessarily representative of the community. And this on the screen is a great graph that has shown sort of the progress and the timeline of the PSF over the past couple of years. And this is from one of our a member of the diversity and inclusion group, Teresa, created this graph. So shout out to Teresa. And in this timeline, we see that here the pink, the different colors represent different regions of the world. And initially, this is a graph that goes from 2000, the year 2000 up to 2015. And we initially see that up to 2023, but from 2000 itself up to 2015, we see the graph is mainly pink. And they're like maybe one or two lines of blue in there as well. And basically what this represents is that most of the board members were coming from North America, with maybe one or two people featuring from Europe. And what we see on this graph is that what happened in 2015 and 2016 was that people from the community from all over the world started publicly saying, tweeting about it or sharing in discussion forums that they'd like to see more diversity on the board representing the region of the world that they come from, so that their needs could also be advocated for. Unfortunately, the Python community is really welcoming and great. And over time, what we see is that graph has become more and more colorful. And I actually think right now, the APAC region has some of the strongest representation it's ever had on the board currently. And I think that's a fantastic testament to the work that the PSF and the community has done over time. And I think it's beneficial for open source projects, for Python as a whole, that if you want to grow a more international group of users, and even this is not even just for the PSF or the Python community, but even for you in your project, if you're working on a Python project or working on creating a startup or whatever company you're in, if you have a representative group of your users, so whoever you want to target as your users, those people being represented in your leadership in your company are great, because they can show you some of the needs that they have directly, and you're able to better serve your community. And I think this has been the case for Python, as it's one of the fastest growing languages in the world, and it continues to be so. So another thing that I think this idea of transcendence teaches us is about belonging and how we see ourselves represented and what we start to feel as we are included. So I don't think there's something in recent years. I think there's been a lot of pushback against the word diversity. And there's a lot of people who feel like that's an abrasive word, or they don't like talking about diversity, or they think it's just like, I don't know, a cop-out or something like that. And I think one of the issues that has kind of caused people to maybe feel this way is because we kind of box diversity into one thing. And I don't think that this topic of representation is just about our gender or about our race. I think it goes even further beyond that. And oftentimes, when we think about diversity, we can sometimes just focus on demographics. But I love this quote, and I'm not sure who to attribute it to, but it's a quote that I saw online on the internet, and it says, diversity is about demographics. Inclusion is about a sense of belonging. So I think it's important that we advocate for more women to be in Python and in software engineering in general. But I also think we need to not just advocate for that, but really also understand that we need to cultivate a sense of belonging in our community. And something that I've personally witnessed is that when we create spaces where we have shared goals or shared values, it doesn't matter what someone looks like, their ethnicity, or which region of the world they come from, or whether you're a male or female, that when you feel like you belong in a community and you can contribute to reaching a goal as part of that community, you create a really unique environment that can lead to lots of different inspiration and creativity as a result of the diversity in the room. And this doesn't, like I mentioned before, it's not just about demographics, but also in different sort of fields or areas of expertise that people are coming from. So an example that I wanted to give of this is someone called Pat Hanrahan. And for context, Pat is the founder of Tableau software, and Tableau was actually sold to Salesforce. He sold it to Salesforce for about $16 billion a few years ago, which is a lot of money. He also is, though he's a software engineer, he won 3 Academy Awards for his work on rendering technology that he did for Pixar. So he worked for Pixar for a while. And he was also currently a professor at Stanford University. And a few years ago, I was actually working at NVIDIA. And when I was at NVIDIA, Pat was invited to come and give a talk about innovation and creativity and the role those two things played in his career. And in the talk that he gave, he shared that some years ago when he was working on rendering software, he was working on this rendering software for Pixar, and he was trying to figure out how to represent light reflecting on skin. And at the time, he was struggling to figure this out, but he had lots of friends who were into art, and he was also really curious about art, and it led him to study a Dutch artist called Rembrandt. And it was when he was studying this artist, Rembrandt, and the painters of that time, that he discovered a technique they were using in oil painting called impasto. And when he was studying this technique, it gave him a deeper understanding of how light interacts with translucent surfaces. And I'll quote him directly from that talk he gave. And in the talk, he says, artists, they sort of instinctively figured it out. They don't know about the physics of light transportation. Inspired by this whole idea of Rembrandt's, I came up with a mathematical model. And it was actually from this model that he went, that he found from Rembrandt and that he came up with, that was inspired by Rembrandt, that he went on to create this rendering technique that was used in Pixar films like Toy Story and Finding Nemo, and then ultimately led him to win this Academy Award. So I think one of the awesome things about this is that to have a welcoming community means that we allow different people in our community. So I can imagine, a Python community where we aren't just software engineers, but it's a community that's filled with artists and lawyers and farmers or whoever it is, whatever skill or background you're coming from, you're welcome in our community. And that will lead to, when our community is welcome and when there's representation, not just from different demographics, but from different backgrounds and different area expertise, then it means that we have a greater capacity to be creative. And I actually remember being at a conference earlier this year in PyCon Italia, and there was someone called Anwesha. She gave a talk, and she was sharing about how she wanted to transition into tech. And when she wanted to do that, she was a lawyer at the time by profession. And when she wanted to change and become a software engineer, she used to start to attend PyCon events. And whenever she would tell people that, she would be in conversation or listening to people, and when she would mention that she's a lawyer, people would just kind of judge her for that and be really not nice and just kind of exclude her from the conversation or think she doesn't. We shouldn't even talk to her because she doesn't know what she's saying. But that's a missed opportunity because we can learn so much from each other when we embrace people and welcome people from different areas of expertise. So I would definitely encourage you, regardless of which background you come from, I would really encourage you to think about what is the most inclusive version of our community. What could that look like for you? I know right now as well in the software engineering space, there are some amazing people who inspire me. And I was talking about inspiration before and how it's amazing to see representation in the Python community specifically. And somewhere that also I see that happening is in the more technical parts of the Python language. So for example, we have Marietta and Joanna, who are amazing people that are part of the Python community and PyLadies, but also doing amazing work as core Python developers. And that's one thing that I would love to see in terms of what does the most inclusive and most representative version of our community look like. And I think I would love to see more women getting involved in leadership technical leadership in the Python space. And yeah, I just hope that our community becomes more and more welcoming. So that is actually all that I have for my talk today. And yeah, I would love to know if anyone has questions. Thank you for listening.
Hi, thank you, Marlene, for a fantastic story that you are sharing with us. All right, let me see. There's whether there's any questions. Is there any questions coming from everybody for Marlene? I don't see any questions from Marlene. I just want to share my thought that after I listening to what you share about like learning from a painter and then apply the technique onto something. That is, I think that is sometimes right is really something that we can learn from. It to me it's like when I heard that it's like oh yeah we can really learn from anybody, and it's all about like how we can apply what we learn to do something more meaningful. Thank you for sharing that story. That story kind of like stick with me. So
That's amazing.
Carol, yeah. So there's a question coming from Carol. So if you could change one thing in the Python community for 2024, what would it be? So
Oh, wow. Hi, Carol.
Marlene.
She's online. Carol is also a core Python developer that I should have mentioned. One of my favorite people in the Python community, and like it's amazing. So thanks, Carol, for being here. If I could change something, is I would love to see more women from around the world being involved in core Python. I think that's something that I think would be fantastic to have more representation from women in those spaces. And I think one way that we could do that is maybe like at PyLadies doing a core Python sprint, like we could do a sprint together, or just like an intro to core Python. I feel like something like that would be amazing. So I'm not sure exactly how we can do that, but that's something I would love to see.
Thank you. I think Carol also mentioned that like she agreed with that, and we are doing some mentoring. Have some mentoring coming up. I think that's great.
Okay.
Yeah, I think Alexandra have mentioned have a comment here. She is a former art historian here, and thank you for your encouraging words.
Oh,
Right.
that's awesome. Yeah. I think art is super important. And for example, even right now with AI is becoming super popular and generative AI is becoming very popular. And I think that if we don't have artists kind of leading that train of AI and machine learning, I think we're going to lose a lot of the creativity and it's just going to become super mechanical. So art history is amazing, and I hope you apply that skill to your Python code as well. So.
Thank you. I think our code in some way is a form of art, right?
Yeah, it is.
And we are
It really is.
doing that, right?
Yes, I
Let me
agree.
see. Thank you. All right. I do not see any other questions. Do you have anything more to add before like we can wrap it up here?
I don't really have anything else to add other than please join the mentorship sessions. I would love to. I might join myself probably, and I would love to see more. Yeah, just more of the people watching, more of the PyLadies involved in the Python community. There's also the PSF Board of Elections. The elections are coming, I think, sometime next year, early next year. So if you have any questions about running for the PSF board as well, I'm happy to chat with you if you would like. So, yeah.
All right. Then that's a wrap for this sessions here, and thank you very much, everybody. And I would like to say thank you for PyLady Conference for this opportunity for me as the MC for this FPAC sessions. And hope to see everybody again.